Well, thanks everybody. It's been a terrific morning of panels and insights on the what's happening with digital democracy and the digital frontier. We wanted to close the session with the folks on the ground who are really being impacted directly, and that's the artists and creators. So we have a great panel today of really innovative and interesting artists that include filmmakers, musicians, photographers, and illustrators. And what I'd like to do to start off with is you all have lengthy and fascinating resumes, but I want to see if you can boil it down to 60 seconds. And rather than me make that judgment about what's most interesting about you and your lives and how it relates to this conversation, I'd like for you to do that. And Ellen, why don't we start with you?
Okay, 60 seconds. Well, our film was released about a year ago, and I was very excited when that happened because finally we might make a little money back and be able to pay off our $250,000, production debt. But within 24 hours, not surprisingly, our film made its way online, and from there, 1,000 links became 10,000 links, became tens of thousands of links. And so I immediately set off making my little DMCA, notices. And I have to take exception to one thing I heard earlier today, the congressman who said the DMCA works well. In my mind, for an independent artist, the DMCA is sort of like being given an umbrella and being told to stand under Niagara Falls. It's about as effective. So quickly I realized that piracy was, rampant. But what troubled me most was the fact that I saw when I started digging deeper, the fact that not only was piracy rampant, but that other people were making money off our film and the content of other creators across the board. This isn't just about our film. And so I started to dig deep into that business model and started to document what I found, and ended up in the process becoming sort of an inadvertent advocate, speak out for indie artists about what piracy is doing to our livelihood.
Great. I want to get back to some of those issues because you had some really interesting experience there. Brad Holland.
Well, I'll take about 5 seconds. I'm an artist and a sometime writer. I've worked for Vanity Fair, The New Yorker, Playboy, The New York Times, and a number of publications here and there. And a few years ago, a number of us started an organization called the Illustrators Partnership, which is really more like a neighborhood watch group for a neighborhood that needs a lot of watching these days.
Great. Colleen?
I'm a cartoonist and illustrator. I work primarily for Marvel and DC Comics. Superman is my boss. I've drawn Wonder Woman, Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. I work with writers like Neil Gaiman, Anne Rice, Warren Ellis, Clive Barker. And currently I'm working on several graphic novels, one for Houghton Mifflin, which will be out in the fall, and a couple of books for DC Comics Vertigo Division and for Dark Horse.
Okay, great. John Harrington.
My name is John Harrington, and I've most recently wrapped up serving 2 terms as president of the White House News Photographers Association. But I've been very active in the issues of copyright, specifically for American Photographic Artists, APA, formerly Advertising Photographers of America. I've talked for and with them on behalf of copyright issues. I've worked with ASMP and across the country promoting copyright issues and encouraging people to register their copyright. Personally have over 400,000 images registered with the Copyright Office, and continue to try to advocate for photographers and help photographers understand the value of their copyright. DMCA has been useful for me, and we can talk about that later, but I work very hard to help other photographers out. Wrote a book on the subject as well, but I've been taking pictures for over 20 years here in Washington, and have really seen a lot transpire in the last 20 years as a photographer.
Great. Marcus Johnson.
Probably one of the weirdest musicians that you'll find. Actually, I consider myself a lawyer, an MBA, a professor that just happens to play music. I use my keyboard pulpit, as I say, as I travel around the world to help artists be able to create their content, and then I speak on how they can protect it at the same time. I've released 15 CDs. I've won the Small Business Administration's Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award. But my main claim to fame is seeing the aha moments for my students as they write business plans, and they recognize, number one, that they can dream and that they can do it, and that they must understand the infrastructure of copyright and other business infrastructure so that they are allowed to have fun with it and enjoy it and make money from it.
Okay. Evan Lowenstein?
Hi, Evan Lowenstein's my name. I'm a singer-songwriter for 18 years now. I had 3 top 40 hits in the year 2000, 2001, and that's actually when I experienced my first run-in with piracy. Our first big hit was called Crazy for This Girl. It was climbing the charts in the end of 2000, and at the same time our record sales were dropping. And it was the first time we had experienced anything like this, or anybody at Columbia Records had ever seen anything like that. So then that sort of got me very interested. I'd always been interested in connecting with my fans online, but I started paying closer attention to what the issues we were facing as artists. And 2 years ago, I decided to venture out to see if I couldn't find ways to at least sidestep piracy. And today we now have a company called Stage It, which is a live video interactive platform that allows artists to connect with their fans through live and through a live and interactive medium where they can monetize that, and we're finding a lot of success, and so I hope I get a chance to talk about that today.
Well, that's a great place to start. Let's just reverse down the panel this time. The question I'd like to ask is, how has this generally impacted what you do, and what are you doing to adapt to the environment? And Stage It is a great example. It's fascinating. I looked at it this morning, and this is a way in which you can find artists and get sort of specialized content and pay very minimal fees to get this customized content.
Correct.
I'm sure I'm not characterizing it very well.
No, that's fine. I think what we set out to do is, I'm as an artist, I'm really, I think we represent the creators here, here, and we are very close to those who we make product for. So I'm very close to my fans, and so I was toting the line. This gentleman Osama Hussein was talking about in the last panel about we have to be very careful, sort of who our consumers are, who are out to hurt us, and who are actually out to help us. And so I spent a lot of time trying to look at it through the vantage point of my fans, and why are they stealing my music? Are they really trying to steal my music? Are they really trying to hurt me? Or are they really just trying to get the music? And I looked around the web and I found there's really no place for these fans to give me money if they really wanted to. And I'm saying it aside from the iTunes and some of the obvious for static content. And so where that led me was to start thinking, a lot about where the fans find value, and I started thinking a lot about who my fans were, and my fans are our store clerks, and they're kindergarten teachers, and they fold T-shirts at the Gap, and they're surgeons, and none of them have the ability to do something one time and cut and paste it. So I started thinking about a lot of different combinations of where they find value is in time. And so if we could put the artist together with the fan in real time, a lot of things would happen. Number one, the fans value their own time, so they'd be willing to pay for it, and that's what we're finding. Additionally, I think that by creating this, we have this notion of value equals experience over frequency. So the value of any experience is direct proportion to the frequency of that event. So by limiting, we only do live content, and we try to create something special out of it. So we also set out to look at what was happening in the real world, so to speak, that people were finding value, and that's the live show, and what was happening online where people really were engaging, and sort of we try to put together this intimacy of like chatting with each other, which people were doing online, and bringing the two together. So what happens if you take Jimmy Buffett to sort of have this really cool experience with his fans online? And when you have it live, now you're putting the fans directly across the table, so to speak, from the artist, and they're less likely to not take, and in fact they actually want to give directly. We've created this direct fan to artist relationship, whereby which the fan actually wants to give money directly to the artist, as opposed to giving it to the retailer, who's giving it to the manager, or the label rather, giving it to the manager, giving the artist. The artist never knows there's any connectivity, but we've created this world where they're together live in the same time, and that's really creating a lot of value.
I think it's really innovative, and as opposed to paying $100 or more for a ticket, the prices that I saw were like $3-6 range. I mean, very, very cheap to get the same, actually more of an experience than what you'd get live, because you're creating sort of a specialized innovation.
We say it's a front row seat to a backstage experience.
Yeah, that's a great way to frame it.
Thank
Marcus, how about you? I noticed that you, given your particularly interesting and broad and specialized background, kind of went around the system a little and kind of beat the system by doing it your own way, right?
I mean, we're still working on it. It's a work in progress. I mean, one of the things that I think is very important is the personal touch, and I think that artists over time have lost that. I think that we have a lot of people that are still caught in the 90s and the 80s, where you put out a record and it works. I mean, I had a guy who was a very successful jazz pianist call me one day, and asked me to go on tour with him, and then came and had a conversation. And when he was dropped from his record label, he said, Marcus, I actually thought that somebody was going to call me right back up. And he's like, I just didn't believe. He's like, I've been depressed over the last 12 months because of the fact that, I thought I was this guy and that everybody wanted to, deal with me, and that it was my music and it was about me. And I think what we started to understand is that through all of this economic and technological disruption, communication is very key. So what we've done, one of the ways that we've combated stuff is actually creating our 3 Keys and Flow newsletter. And our new company, Flow, is a lifestyle company which is about lifestyle enhancement. So we produce concerts. We have our Flow series, which we've actually, as you said, getting to the people. We did a deal with a Stop and Shop and Giant and put our Flow CDs there. And then understanding that we are dealing with the lifestyle of our client, I started recognizing at all my performances that my number one target market, women, were starting to drink wine and switching out of spirits to wine. So I had this bright idea and approached a vineyard in northern Virginia to actually produce a series of vintages of their wine. We did that last year, and we got placements in places like the W, Stop and Shop, Super Value, and had a little price point problem because we started getting orders that were more than the actual vineyard could produce. So I took the head of sales from this particular vineyard. We went out to Napa, and as of October, we're going to do a national release with chains like Total Wine and More. We have distribution through Southern Wine and Spirit, Southern Super Value, and a couple of others, HMS Host, so we can get my people where they are. I think artists really have to look at this from a marketing and business perspective and know what your consumers are, who they are, and not just demographics, it's psychographics. The last thing and most important, I think, is telling the truth. I think that the people in the community think that we live a glamorous lifestyle. And on my blog, I tell the truth. I wrote a blog from a Virgin airline plane about 3 months ago, basically like it's 2 o'clock in the morning or somewhere over the United States. And, the title is, it must be hard to date a musician or someone like you. And I'm like, really? I miss births. I miss deaths. I miss important, ballet. I can't go to my nieces or nephews' horse shows. But telling the truth, we are not living a glamorous lifestyle. I was in Paris, but then the next day I was in London, and then the next day I was back in New York, and then the next day I was in L.A. That crap is hard. And if we actually go out and tell the truth from the perspective of, here's what I'm doing, and I'm working hard just like you. So it's really a catch-22 because you think you have to tell people, I'm living some big lifestyle. The rap guys are like, hey, I'm doing this and that and the other. Yeah, right. Most of you all are broke as hell. Yeah. And tell the story. In your raps, tell the real story. I'd like to live this way. But I find it, and when you see the responses from the people, they're like, this is why I love you, because you're transparent. I've talked about my divorce online. I've talked about my new relationships online, traveling, business, everything. That will get somebody to say, you know what? I got to support this person. Yeah. That is what makes it real to them.
That's a great point. I know at least from the music business side of things that you can't just be a recording artist anymore. You've got to, it's a total 360 experience in order to be successful. The merch side is really big now, and so you're
it's the brand,
and it means you got to work that much harder.
You are a brand.
Yeah.
It is in the class I teach is basically from the perspective of the artist as a CEO. And I've spoken everywhere from Harvard on down about that. When you decide to do this, it's no longer, I'm going to take a picture, I'm going to paint. You need to know where you're going to have your show. You need to know what newsletter you need to, what group you need to be on MySpace or Facebook or Twitter or all three. Can you do an alpha links to link all three of them together, which you can. You need to know all of this.
I often say, actually, that a band is the ultimate startup.
Yeah, so. It is.
Great example. Great. John, photography. How does this all impact your world?
I think there's the challenge. It's one of the things I hear and resonates with me is this challenge monetarily, where people I think that there's this luxurious lifestyle that creators live, and I don't. I like to think that I do okay, but I don't have a yacht. I don't have a vacation home. I don't have those things. But when you call somebody and you explain to somebody My fee for what you're asking for is $5,000 or $2,500 or $10,000. That people say, people all of a sudden, I can hear them doing the math in their head, and they're going $5,000 a day times 25,000, 5 days a week, 25,000 times 52. Oh, we don't need a photographer that expensive. But what they don't realize is that you might have that. They're not only are they going to benefit from that content that you're creating multiple times over the next X number of years, but you don't get those days every day. There are pre-production days, post-production days, and it just really is this fallacy that we're dealing with. And when you start even talking about broader usage fees than that, it just people have this misinterpretation. And I think that you're right. I think as far as creatives is concerned, and I know for sure for photographers, there are a lot of other things that you can do. And one of the things that I really believe is that if you are really compelled to be creative, if you are really compelled to do what you're doing, you're going to suffer through the challenges. And I don't really feel like we need to suffer through challenges of people stealing our work, monetizing it, and then not compensating us for it. And I really have a great respect for people who defend their copyrights. I had a conversation. I was walking through the halls with John Sebastian a number of years ago, and we were actually headed to Sonny Bono's office when Sonny was still in office and alive, and we were talking about copyright. And I said, how do you protect your copyright? How do you do that? He said, I treat it like a strainer. He said, I know that I can't catch everything like a bucket could. But everything that I do catch, I really go after and I really push on. And he said, so I focus on copyright like that. And I had the luxury of spending the day with him and talking about copyright. I was traipsing around the hill, taking pictures of various meetings. But it's a challenge, I think, for creatives to have to deal with the business side and the copyright side. And it's unfortunate that so few really do take full advantage of the benefits inured by the Constitution. So, tangentially, as probably David Carson would say, but nonetheless inured. So,
When you say tangentially, what do you mean?
Well, I'm sure I can get myself in a hole. It's in there. It's in the first third of the Constitution.
Article 1, Section 8.
I know where it is
expressly.
exactly.
I mean, no. But see, the thing about it is, is not tangential.
No,
it is expressly in our
Constitution. It is in there. I agree with you. I'm just trying to, present both sides. It's. Sorry, David.
Well, I love the strainer analogy. I mean, that's a great one, and as an old fan of John Sebastian's, I love that story. Tell us about the illustrator's perspective on this.
Well, I come from an industry that's historically very exploitative of creators. And if you go to art school, they tell you, do not be a comic book artist. It is the worst paying gig ever. You do this because you love it. On the off chance you do get a hit, you can make some money. But I tell you what, we don't even start to see a royalty check on the properties that we don't own until they've sold 50,000 copies. We don't get anything. There's no back end. There are no benefits. We don't get retirement. We don't get health care. We get nothing. We get a page rate, and that is all we get. And it wasn't even until the 1980s that creators were in a position to start pushing for rights to own copyright on anything. If I work on Wonder Woman or Superman or whatever, I don't own diddly squat. If it sells well enough or gets collected into trade paperback form, I get a payment on the back end. So every time somebody is out there downloading, I'm sort of gritting my teeth going, I could really use that new pair of glasses. I worked on Amazing Spider-Man number 600. It sold like great numbers, and I got a royalty check for $150-something, but I went from one website to the other, seeing 2,000 downloads and 1,500 downloads, and I'm going, okay, there are the sneakers I don't have, there's the health insurance payment. Now, for a fact that a lot of these people weren't going to buy the stuff anyway. They just want to read it. I understand that. But it isn't just about downloading books. It's about going on eBay and seeing people sell T-shirts with my paintings on them. In Indonesia. Do they even know who I am in Indonesia? I don't know. Apparently they do. There are people selling paintings of mine in Russia, print on demand. I can't stop these people, but I'm not getting any benefits from this. Now, what can I do to fight it? Well, I took computer science in college. I've had a website since 1999. I blog, I message board, I do all of that stuff. I tell you what, I didn't see any benefit until last year. It was nothing but dribs and drabs until last year. I did everything they said you were supposed to do: regular blogging, regular posting, communication with the audience.
So what was the breakthrough? Was it just the accumulation of your
I spent a buttload of money on advertising. I took the advice that everybody says. Piracy is good for you. Piracy will bring you an audience. Piracy will expand your market. For 3 years, I didn't deliver a single takedown notice because the one and only time I did, I got such a bad reaction from the fans on the pirate website. I thought they were going to kill me. I was like, okay, well,
with
all
fans
right.
like that, you don't need enemies.
Yeah,
so.
really. Thank you for being my supporter. And so I didn't do anything for 3 years, and my traffic was moribund. So I took all of my royalty checks from one of my books, the only one on which I own all the rights, because most of my books sign a contract, you know, the publisher owns the digital rights and all that stuff. I took the one book on which I have all of the rights and started serializing it online. I dropped all of my royalties for 2 years from that book into the website. In the third year, even though it's been online since 1999, but in the third year, I started getting more per month than I used to make per year on that book. But it took 12 years for that to take off, and 3 years worth of serious investment.
Can you explain to us how that how the takedown response manifests itself? I mean, what exactly happened?
It's a total waste of time. I swear to God. I love
you
being...
You mean the takedown is a total...
It's so time... It's like 20 minutes per... You know, you got to jump through their hoops and do whatever it says on their site and look for their address and blah, blah. They do not make it easy. If it's foreign, you can just forget it. And if it's domestic, yeah, great. But if you do deliver a takedown notice to a site where people know who you are, and you may get a very, very nasty response from the public. And you've got to weigh your... You know, you got to pick
Did they
your battles.
Organize a response to you? In other words, was it kind of there's a community out there that they can tap really quickly and
my
just
God.
kind of flood you, right?
I made a public statement about piracy back in November. It was actually an article I'd written a year before. I got death threats and hacks on my website for weeks.
And was that like an organized response?
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was brutal.
It's pretty tied together.
It was brutal, and it was a very innocuous article. It wasn't saying, you know, let's take you on your site and let's kill you. And I was like, you know, I think we could really use an educational initiative to help, you know, get young people to understand the impact of copyright violation on the creators. We're people. We're not data. We are not zeros and ones. We are human beings. This is a human experience we're sharing with you. Please respect that. And they went, kill her. It's just,
Brad, have you had a similar experience?
Oh, I don't know. I've always thought that all artists tend to create out of similar motivations, but we do work from different business models. We all know that there are lots of musicians who are willing to give their work away because they think they can sell lots of tickets to concerts. Now, I work in the same kind of medium that Leonardo da Vinci worked in. I take wood panels, I gesso them with many layers of gesso, I paint on them, I do ink drawings the same way Dürer did them. I mean, I'm a non-digital artist. I would be happy to go on the internet and give my work away the next time I think I can fill Yankee Stadium with people who want to watch me do one of my paintings. So we have to function out of a different business model. Traditionally, illustrators, and I tend to think that illustrator is an old word. Illustration goes back to the days when you wanted to illustrate articles. That goes back to the days of the Saturday Evening Post and the Strand magazine and Collier's and so on. Over the last 40 years, most illustrators have become, I don't like the word because it's kind of pompous, but have really become graphic commentators. 40 years ago, it was rather common for illustrators to do literally what they were told by art directors. Over the last 40 years, most of us have fought for the right to express ourselves, to come up with our own ideas, and instead of illustrating articles, to marry the articles to texts. That in itself was a long time. It took me almost 10 years to get art directors to consider the idea of, I started working when I was 17, so I got a good head start. But it took me almost 10 years to convince art directors that you could marry a picture to the text instead of necessarily trying to channel the writer's sensibility into your own pictures. And just about the time that came along, we began to deal with the digital revolution. As I said, most of us worked in traditional media, and we worked in the same way songwriters did back, say, around the turn of the previous century. We sold our work as primary rights, and most of us didn't pay attention to our secondary rights. Once we did a picture for a magazine, that was it. You couldn't sell it again. It was actually considered unethical to sell it to somebody again. What that left was that all of our secondary rights became fair game to a whole generation of middlemen who moved in. In fact, two of the world's richest men moved in with these stock agencies representing themselves to artists as agencies that would go out and get them new kinds of work. What they did was they took this work under long-term contracts with non-compete clauses and contracts that would keep the work off of markets for years after you claimed your rights back. And then they went after the same clients that we were generating work for at hugely discounted prices. Now, I refused to give my work to these people, but lots of people did. And before the 1980s were out, a lot of artists who were making good livings, middle-aged people who have had fine careers, were suddenly being driven out of the business, and a lot of them now are doing something completely different. Or they have full-time jobs and do art almost as a hobby. The real challenge for us, for artists, who are, after all, kind of isolated people, we work as individuals scattered across the country, the challenge for us is to find a way to come together and to get a grip on our secondary marketing, on our secondary rights, and find a way to market that in ways that we control the content rather than these middlemen. I won't get into any more of that right now, but it's not piracy in the sense that you all have been talking about it, because our business model is so different. But it's the challenge that I think graphic artists, I like to think of as more as popular artists. The old cliche that that's not art, that's illustration. If we could convince people that what we do is popular art, then they'd have to say that's not art, that's popular art, and then we'd have the critics where we want them.
That's great. That's a very interesting perspective that I hadn't really thought much about, the whole middleman component that you just expressed. Thank you for that. Ellen, your story about your movie and then Came Low is a fascinating one, and the interesting thing about it, and ironic, and not in a good way, is that it was actually enjoyed spectacular success around the world and got translated, I think, into 14 or more languages. Except you didn't condone any of that. It was all done by people making money from your work. And you had to raise, what, $250,000 to make that film?
Right. As with all the panelists, each one of us has a different scenario for how our work gets distributed and experienced. And for film, it's obviously not a live performance. It's someone sitting and watching your film. And yeah, our film has been quite successful in terms of festivals. We've screened in nearly 100 festivals around the world. But I want to draw a distinction with regard to film, because you have you have the big studios that people love to bash endlessly, which I don't believe in, because there are a lot of people that work for those big studios that deserve to earn a living and work at every level from the ground up to make a living. But that being said, the studio release films generally have theatrical releases, meaning they can make their money at the box office. A lot of independent films, in fact, probably most independent films don't have that luxury, don't have theatrical releases aside from the festival releases. So all the income, all your ability to pay back your debt, which is essentially what indie filmmaking is all about, comes on the back end, meaning after the release. So our film was released on DVD, Blu-ray, and we got it out on a lot of VOD, video on demand channels, iTunes, Amazon, Netflix, etc., trying to reach as wide an audience as possible. Now, oftentimes people who talk about piracy and sort of defend piracy blame the creators. They say you don't have the right business model. Well, I have to take issue with that, because we've worked very hard to get our film made available to audiences around the world. I took subtitles And I added them, Portuguese subtitles, Spanish subtitles. We assigned a deal with a online distribution company in Canada called Bus Films, which is an up-and-coming new startup, to get our film out to worldwide audiences, and they can, open and close different markets depending on what contracts you have, etc. The other thing we did was we developed an iPhone app for our film, which is a free download available in app stores worldwide that anybody who wants to see the film can download for free. They're allowed to see a lot of different content, including a 20-minute behind-the-scenes featurette of the film, and then you have an in-app purchase option. For the cost of a latte, you can watch the film. So we try to get our film out there to as many legitimate audiences as possible. And I have to say our film came out at a very bad time. I mean, if it had happened 5 years ago, we would have easily made our money back via DVD sales. Today's piracy sort of makes you long for the days of DVD bootlegging. To at least then the pirates had to have a tangible product. They actually had to spend money to make that product. And the distribution was limited to back alley flea markets, etc. And nowadays, with the click of a mouse, a would-be pirate can, steal your content and post it worldwide and have a ready audience. So, obviously filmmakers, we have to compete with the pirates to offer up our products legitimately. And we have an audience, especially with a film like ours, a very passionate audience that, doesn't get to see a lot of films about their lives. So you have to take that into consideration. And I'm not out to demonize the end user by any means. I appreciate that audiences want to see the film and I want to get it out to them. The key is you have to sort of compete with free, and that's hard. I mean, I even found websites where, there's a stream of our film on a website in its entirety, and right next to it is a Netflix ad. Now, our film is on Netflix, but you can obviously see the irony there.
Yeah.
Why should I join Netflix, pay $10 a month, when I can click this button here and watch this film in HD for free? It's kind of impossible. So it sort of leaves us in a very bad place. And I have to say that I think in the end, if something's not done, if we can't come together in a reasonable way and talk about what solutions are possible, it's the consumer that's going to be hurt. And I think that goes across all these different types of creativity we've been speaking about. Because what's going to happen is that the diversity of content is going to diminish. The people who make art for the sake of making art, but who have to pay the rent, may not continue to make their art because they can't afford to.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think your experience is one that's probably been shared by many, and I know from what I've seen before in some of your earlier interviews that you're not particularly encouraged to go out and go through that experience again, so that's a good example of, right, you just can't afford to.
I mean, we're still trying to pay off our production debts, and we made this film not to become millionaires because we had a passion about telling a story. But Megan, my co-director, and I really thought, and I think we had good reason to think, looking at past case scenarios of films similar titles to ours, that we would at least break even. And I would be happy at that point with this.
Yeah.
And I have to add that we signed a SAG, Screen Actors Guild contract, ultra low budget agreement. So we pay our actors who depend on our payments from the back end to pay health benefits. I mean, it's not as simple as just we're greedy filmmakers wanting to make money. It's a whole economy that a lot of different people depend on, and if we're having to compete with free, as is the case right now, we're going to disappear.
Yeah, it's not just you; it's a whole ecosystem.
Videos of big Hollywood blockbusters that are sure bets at the box office, and the stuff in between, and the marginalized audiences who have to work very hard to get a film funded and made to begin with, they're going to start to diminish.
Right. Let me throw this open to anybody on the panel. We're talking about new business models and innovation, and had some great examples on this panel and some we've heard earlier today. And I want to talk a little bit more about things that are around the corner, things that are happening in terms of innovation. And one of the pieces of innovation that seems to be gaining some traction is this idea of trying to give the consumer more a sense that they're participating in the experience. And that's kind of what you're doing with Stage It. Somebody brought up Kickstarter earlier, and I thought that was a really interesting example because I a friend of somebody that I knew was making an album, and I'd never heard of Kickstarter before, but they sort of sent it to me, and it was somebody that I supported a lot. And by contributing a minimal amount of money, I was not only helping get the album made, but I was feeling sort of like a producer, right? I was being part of the project, which is a very interesting, different kind of experience. And so I think that kind of model may be the sort of things that we see increasing in the future. So I just want to ask you, any of you, what are some other kinds of innovations that you see, or maybe things that we haven't even seen yet around the corner? And is the way forward to increase that kind of consumer participation in the product? And maybe that doesn't count. I mean, I don't know how you do that as an illustrator, but maybe you can.
I would actually caution against that on some level. I remember in the 50s there was a comedian who I used to like who'd show up on the Ed Sullivan show named Red Buttons, and he did this little routine that came on week after week, and I loved him. And I heard that he had a show of his own. He was going to have his own half-hour show every week for the next season, and I was really looking forward to that. My mother said he won't last but one season, and I said, why not? And she said, well, a little bit of him goes a long way. And I have a feeling that I've been working for major magazines since John Kennedy was president, and I think one of the things that worked to my benefit was keeping a fairly low profile for most of my career. I didn't really come out of the closet very much to deal with some of this stuff until I got a letter several years ago from an artist who had given some of his work to one of these stock agencies and found that he was being exploited by them. I guess he wrote the same letter to like 100 illustrators who he thought might have some clout in the business to say something, and I turned out to be the only one who called him up to ask what he was talking about, and I figured since I was the only one who responded, it was my obligation to say something. And in touching the Tar Baby, I got stuck in a public way talking about this stuff that I never have throughout most of my career. But I've always had the image of Red Buttons in mind, because his TV show lasted 1 year. My mother was absolutely right. A little bit of him went very far, and he had to seek a career in the movies later, popping up from time to time.
I think one of the other, as I think about it, one of the other models that we can look at is one of the nonprofit model. And I have a friend that is a dancer, and I see how they raise money. Also the symphony orchestras. And many times when I consult with an artist, I ask them to write down what they are. Like, what do you wear? What earrings do you wear? What sweatsuit do you wear? All the way down to what underwear do you wear? Because that's who you are, right? And then we can start looking at particular brands that we might be able to align ourselves with. If you can set up a nonprofit in a 501c3 and actually get your solicitations license, that may be a different way of underwriting, which is one of the things that we've done with, with my foundation. However, and I know it gets to be a touchy subject here, we're going to have to band together to really define what copyright is going to be in the future, because without that, I mean, all of our revenue, all of our money sources come from Section 105, Section 106, and on down. We have to get ahead of it, and we have to band together. One of the things that was very important in the last panel, and I've often thought about this, is the idea of what value we lose in the exportation of our culture. That's what people really like. I mean, going forward, I would posit that our value proposition is that of our standard of living and who we are and what we do, and the fact that we can create music and that we can come together with these new business models, and that we can go outside and walk down the street and whistle a song or play on the street with a license. We have got to band together as illustrators, as musicians, as entrepreneurs, and as big companies, because I think at the end of the day, if we get the model right, and I prescribe to the forefathers in creating a more perfect union, because it's never going to be perfect, the idea that we can make it so that we all, even if we have to redefine what success is, we can all live and have a little bit of fun.
And I think to get there, I think what's important is to recognize that, I mean, I love what Brad was saying about trying to bring back some sort of sense of romance. And I often talk about this lack of mystery between the relationship of an artist and a fan or a content creator and, sort of overindulging. But I think also what Ellen was talking about is really, really important in terms of competing with free. And I think to answer any of these questions, I think we really need to look back the last 10 years and understand, how the landscape of the playing field has changed so much, and that, the consumer now is a huge voice. It has affected brands. It has affected countries. And, the communication triangle has been flipped on its head. And by the communication triangle, I simply mean that there used to be a few people talking and everyone was listening, and now we're all talking and very few people are listening. And in the music industry, it has directly affected an industry that's gone from hundreds of artists making millions of dollars to millions of artists making hundreds of dollars. And I think the big challenge, to all of us is that this voice has been really powerful for the consumer. At the same time, it has definitely brought a lot of confusion in the marketplace. When I was discovered by Jimmy Buffett and brought over to Chris Blackwell, that was the old school, process. I was discovered. I was talent. It was sort of an editorialized procedure, if you will. And they chose me at the top, and they were going to share with the millions of people in America my music. Nowadays, the fan has the ultimate power, and they're discovering people. So when you're a talented illustrator or photographer or an artist, you are now competing against other people that are popping up all over the world that can go directly to these people, and you need to, sort of the challenge is now on us to explain why we are worth $10 for our time or whatever it is, and somebody else's, because the amateurs are out there, they just want to get discovered. And now there's just a tremendous amount of confusion because they just want to get to where we are. Right, so they're going to give it all away for free. They just want to get discovered, and we're sort of, and the fan, the end consumer doesn't know the difference. They don't understand why I'm asking for $10 for my music and why someone else is asking for giving away for free.
I run into people who don't even understand what original art is. They don't understand they don't know what it is, and they're surprised because even though I do comics, a lot of people do comics digitally. Mine are all done by hand, and I found that I need to keep doing them by hand because even though my books are not selling as well as they were, I have a bigger audience, so the value on my original art keeps going up. So that's been a big help.
I keep doing original art because I like to touch it.
I like to touch it too. I just the digital thing. I do digital art especially on deadline, but for the sensuous experience of creating something with your own hands, you can't beat that. I love my Cintiq, but not that much.
I taught a master's course in Milan for a month last year, and it astonished me that hardly any of the students knew how to paint or draw. Their idea of creating was to come in with a laptop, pull something off the internet, run it through Photoshop, and they were horrified at the concept of taking a painting. They said, well, what happens if you don't like the color? I said, well, you paint over it. What happens if you don't like? What if you prefer the one you had before it? I said, well, you have to recover it. There's no saving it in layers. That's not the way it was done.
Yeah. I had a lady go, how do you match the color? And I'm like, I didn't know what she was asking. It's just like, what do you mean?
I think one of the things you're asking about, that kind of joint process or the kind of collaborative process, is a challenge. And I'll put on my kind of photojournalist or photojournalist hat as a photographer for this answer. Is there is everybody has these really great ideas, and a lot of photographers will say, oh, I'm gonna do X, Y, and Z commercial project, or I'm gonna wait tables, and I'm gonna save up enough money because there's a story in South Africa that I want to tell, or there's a story in some other impoverished area that I want to tell. And so then they will go to that area, come back and have the story, but they're interested in it, and maybe a small handful of other people are interested in it. And I think that there's a couple of variations of that Kickstarter concept that I know photographers have used Kickstarter, but there's also a couple of others out there. And I think that there is something to be said for working with an editor and having a vetting process that kind of talks to you about the project and steers you in the right direction, rather than tens of thousands of people just going off on their own with these ideas and cobbling together a few $100s, because then what they do is they come back and they're in debt, and then they can't they're looking for a distribution outlet beyond their blog, and they can't find one, and it's frustrating, and the story still doesn't get told, but everybody finds themselves a bit let down because, yes, they had this great trip, but the impact they were hoping to have from that story doesn't get told.
Ellen, were you trying to jump in there?
Yeah, I'm just talking about the consumer, the end user, and how to sort of bring them into the fold efficiently. Brings to mind an idea that I've been sort of pondering, because we're competing with, say, CyberLocker sites, and I don't know if you're familiar with those, hot file, make, upload, rapid share, all those. They basically host files for free, and then people can go there and download the content. Well, these sites make money by advertising and download subscription fees for faster downloads. And they actually pay end users cash incentives to upload content, steal it, upload it, and then spread the links far and wide as far as they can, because they get paid a cash incentive per 1,000 downloads. So basically they're incentivizing the general public to become pirates because maybe they'll make a little money. And if you look at films like ours, especially those that are serving the LGBT audience, there's a lot of blog sites out there where people go to great lengths, with very sophisticated sites, to offer up listings of LGBT films, and here's the download links, etc. And my idea and my hope would be that down the line we can take those people, and rather than have them be paid by CyberLocker sites, we can make them our own affiliates and say, look, if you sign up with us, and you make these beautiful blogs with wonderful lists and photos of our films and all this great stuff to reach this audience that really appreciates this content. If you sign up with us, we're going to give you a little bit of cash, reward for linking to our film on a legitimate streaming site. So I think there are ways to bring in these fans of our work and not demonize them, but reward them in a way. Because there's really all this amazing stuff out there to get the word out about these films. But yet, for example, I saw one of these blog sites, beautiful site with lots of links to all the current LGBT films and old ones too. And up in the corner, there was a Kickstarter notice for up and coming lesbian title, right? So here you have this blog that's stealing all this content, LGBT filmmakers, but at the same time they're promoting a new film. So they don't really understand. So sometimes I try to write personal letters to these folks and say, look, you understand what's going on here. You're undermining the content that you so appreciate. And so we have to try to do a better job of getting that message across, while at the same time combating these illegitimate sites like CyberLockers that make piracy so easy and so potentially profitable for a lot of different people. It's a very skewed business model. And I think legislation currently that's being offered may be imperfect, but I would really like to see people get together and work out the kinks and make something happen. I keep tweeting Ron Wyden on a daily basis, and he blocks legislation, and it's like, okay, so you don't like it, so what are you going to do? What would you like to do? Offer up some alternatives. And that's where I think we need to move this debate forward, is to come up with something that's workable, protecting personal interests and personal rights, but at the same time protecting the content creators and the vibrance of our creative community.
Well, tweet on, sister, tweet on. Well, everybody else join her. Well, I think we've had a really good perspective here, and it's been a full morning and afternoon, so I don't want to run this much longer. Any questions out there, glad to answer. Any final comments from the panel, be glad to entertain those. Otherwise, I think we'll go ahead and wrap this up.
I've got a question over there.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm a student at Yale University. Thank you. I'm a student at Yale University who is a musician who has made 4 CDs, and actually, Mr. Lowenstein, I've performed your song before. I'm a great fan.
Oh, that's
yeah.
You're the one.
It was totally legal. It was a non-profit function. So anyway, your online performance service has offered remarkable opportunities for artists. But it doesn't affect them. It doesn't affect other contributors to the creative process, such as producers, recording engineers, sometimes songwriters, in the same way. It doesn't offer the same benefits. Do you ever fear that offering solutions for certain people in the camp of working for copyrights is going to eventually undermine the strength of the movement? And this question really goes for all types of content producers. As certain content producers are satisfied, what will happen to the movement as a whole?
Well, that's a great question.
I think it's a very fair question too, and I will answer it with two things. First of all, we have a lot of songwriters who are using our platform who are the guy behind the guy or the girl behind the person behind the song, so to speak. So we're actually creating an opportunity. There's a lot of songwriters in Nashville, Tennessee who wrote these big hits who until now haven't had a chance to go directly to audiences and say outside of Nashville, outside of the Bluebird Cafe. So we are definitely helping some people get beyond that. In terms of the other, the other people involved, the producers, et cetera, we're trying our best to help as many people as possible. I don't think what we're doing is in any way, shape, or form hurting those other entities. We are just talking about the live experience anyway. So some of these artists or songwriters use their own engineers to come and be a part of the experience. We're not creating masters. We're not creating syncs. We're not archiving. So it's the same. We're just offering another experience online of what already exists in the live world. And sort of bringing another revenue stream. I remember as an artist, we used to always say, man, if there was a camera here in the back of the tour bus, we were in the hotel room. And now with the we're able to capitalize on the connectivity of the internet, the advancements in the broadcasting to do it right from your laptop. So when we say take the stage, we literally mean with you where you go and you sit in your laptop. So we certainly do not. We don't feel like we're hurting anybody else, but even if we weren't helping them as much, we're certainly trying to make steps and help people what we're doing so far. So I think we're certainly not hurting anybody. But thanks for the question. Anybody else want to?
I just have a comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think in general what's going to have to happen is that artists are going to have to start experimenting in all kinds of ways to find a way not just to communicate with their audience, but to expand their medium and to find a way around the middlemen who will be moving in to try to handle the business while we handle the art, because that always ends up with businessmen controlling the business. I think it's very fundamental that we find some way to preserve the basic principle behind copyright, which is that we each have a right to the work that we create ourselves. Because if we lose that right in the name of the public interest, we're going to lose a basic human right that's been hard fought for and dearly maintained for centuries. And then we'll have to fight for it from the start all over again.
Here we go.
Just quickly, I find myself in the odd predicament of agreeing with Brad, and because we've disagreed recently on a bunch of things, but I'm in total agreement with him, and it's something that as a trade association we have talked about and worked toward for a number of years, is photographers taking back control of the licensing and distribution of their images. And there are now more and more vehicles out there for photographers to do that, and it's not easy yet, and it's not without pain, but I see that as the future ultimately. That kind of distribution.
And then artists are really going to have to become part of the business process. I know many of the people that I play with don't want to hear that. And it's funny for me because I always hear, you get to sleep in. Like, oh, really? But really from the idea of blogging to emailing to being an active participant in the legislative process on down, we are going to have to be, and these are like the things that you're saying that are imperative. In order to change the legislative policy, we're going to have to be in front of our congressmen and women. We're going to have to blog, or tweet, every day, and they will start to listen.
Artists have always done that. Did you ever read Michelangelo's letters to the Pope? Mm-hmm. They're always about money. Yeah. Dear Pope, you promised so many ducats by so-and-so. I haven't seen the money.
But how do we rectify with the real life situation we're dealing with right now, which is basically boils down to you cannot monetize that which you cannot exclusivitize. So if you have an original piece of artwork, you're holding it in your hand, you can control that. The second it gets out there, I remember even my producers used to tell me back in the day we were making music, they meant something different, but they basically said, we're in the studio right now, we're making this record. Once you put it out there, it's theirs, right? It's theirs. It's their music. They can listen to it, and they have their own take on what it is. This is the last time that you get a chance to sort of control it. And if we really, recognize that there's a real challenge that once it gets out there, someone can start copying things, and we're going to, we are talking about chasing people down here, but at the same time, it's one of the things I just recently wrote an article where I said, artists, stop giving away yourselves, your only remaining asset, which is yourself. And that's why we do live with artists in real time, because we believe that the only thing that an artist can actually has the exclusive on and can actually control is themselves in real time, because anything they do this is now being recorded, and it's out. I can't control this anymore. And my bio, my pictures, and my music, and my videos, you can have anything. The only thing you can't have is me at 2 o'clock today, because I'll be gone. And there's a value to that.
What I'm trying to do on my blog, because I blog incessantly, I've even put up my Social Security statement. And I'm like, here's what I made for the entirety of the 1980s. I was working on books that sold 40, 100,000 copies, and I made less than $10,000 a year. Please get over this idea that creators are rich just because you see our name on a popular book. We do not make that kind. I make more money than that now, by the way. Please don't. But what I'm trying to get through to them is we are not monopolizing the content. We personally are the monopoly. You take away from us the mechanism that allows us to produce the financial incentive. There's no more. Okay, you get it? I have a farm. I can shovel cow manure all day, and I've done it. You make it economically impossible. You don't get any more books from me. This is the monopoly. It's not the book. It's the creator. Don't take away our livelihood. You don't get any more stuff. You might get it from somebody else, but it's not the same thing.
And we should not be ashamed of making money. I mean,
hell no.
Profit is not a four-letter word.
Yeah, that's how I look at it.
Right. All right, on that note, to more money,
hell no.
more compensation for all artists, kill the middleman. This has been really enlightening, a great panel. How about a hand for the panel here? And thank you all for coming very much on behalf of CREATE and the folks who helped put it together. I've been looking at this stuff a long time. I learned a lot of new things today. Hope you all did too. And keep the fight going. It's a very challenging situation we all face as we learned today, and there's a lot to do, and we got to keep the pressure on and keep looking for new innovations and new solutions. As the artists here today proved, you can't just be an artist anymore. You've got to be a 360. You've got to be a marketer. You've got to be a business person. So it's increasingly challenging for our artists to thrive and continue to put out the great sort of work that they do. So let's do all that we can to make sure that they can do it in the future. Thank you.